The baby elephant was so small that he fit in a man's arms. Not standing beside him, not walking next to him, but actually curled up in his arms like a dog that had given up on the world. His eyes were half closed. His trunk hung loose. And the man holding him was not a vet, not a ranger, not someone trained for any of this. He was just a person who could not walk away. That man's name was Daniel Osei. And 3 weeks before this moment, he had never even touched an elephant in his life. It was early morning in the Wang region of Zimbabwe when the call came in. A young elephant, maybe 4 days old, had been found alone near a dried-up water hole about 6 kilometers from the nearest village. No herd in sight. No tracks leading back to a family. Just a tiny gray animal sitting in the dirt, too weak to stand properly, making a sound that the man who found him said he would never forget. Daniel worked as a field assistant for a small local conservation group. His job was mostly counting animals, recording data, and helping researchers set up cameras in the bush. Nothing dramatic. Nothing like this. When he reached the water hole that morning and saw the calf for the first time, his first thought was practical. Call someone. Report it. Let the people with the right training handle it. That was the correct thing to do. But the calf turned his head toward Daniel the moment he got close. And he just looked at him. No fear. No attempt to move away. Just this tiny exhausted animal looking up at a stranger like he was asking a question. Daniel made the calls. He contacted the Wildlife Authority. He reached out to 2 different rescue organizations. The responses he got were not encouraging. One organization said they were at full capacity and could not take in any new animals for at least 3 weeks. The other said the calf was too young and too weak and that survival chances were very low, and they did not want to use resources on an animal that was unlikely to make it. The Wildlife Authority told him to monitor the situation and check if the herd returned. The herd never returned. By the 2nd day the calf had not eaten. He was too young to eat anything from the ground, and without his mother he had no source of milk. Daniel stayed at the water hole through the night, not because anyone asked him to, but because he could not bring himself to leave. He covered the calf with his jacket when the temperature dropped. He tried to give him water using his own hands. Nobody was coming. And this animal was running out of time. Daniel had no experience raising elephants. He had read about them, observed them from a distance during field work, and written notes about their behavior for researchers. But keeping one alive with his bare hands was something completely different. The first problem was milk. Newborn elephants need their mother's milk every few hours. Without it, their bodies start shutting down faster than most people realize. Daniel drove to the nearest town, which took over an hour on dirt roads, and bought every can of powdered formula he could find. Not elephant formula. Regular baby formula from a small shop that mostly sold cooking supplies and phone credit. It was not the right thing. But it was the only thing available. He drove back, mixed it with water, and tried to feed the calf using a plastic bottle he had cleaned out. The calf did not know what to do with it. He pushed it away with his trunk. He turned his head. He made small frustrated sounds and kept trying to find something that was not there. Daniel sat with him for 2 hours, offering the bottle again and again, until finally, out of exhaustion more than anything else, the calf latched on and drank. It was not a victory. It was just survival for 1 more hour. Daniel named him Tsoko. It was a word from his grandmother's language that meant small one. It felt right. The calf was so tiny that his ears looked too big for his head, and his trunk still had no coordination. He would reach for something and completely miss it. He would try to walk and stumble after 3 steps. Everything about him looked unfinished, like he had arrived in the world before he was fully ready. Over the next few days Daniel barely slept. He was feeding Tsoko every 2 to 3 hours, which meant no stretch of rest longer than 90 minutes at a time. His actual job was falling behind. His supervisor called twice asking where his field reports were. Daniel gave vague answers and kept going. Word got around the village. People came to look. Most of them were kind about it but honest. They told Daniel he was wasting his time. That the calf would not survive without proper care. That he was not equipped for this and he should accept it. One older man who had lived near the bush his whole life told him plainly that sometimes animals die and that is the way things are, and fighting it only makes the loss harder. Daniel heard all of it. He did not argue with any of it. He just kept showing up with the bottle every 2 hours. What nobody saw coming, not Daniel, not the village, not even the organizations that had turned Tsoko away, was what happened at the end of that first week. Something shifted. And it changed everything about what this story was going to become. On the 7th day, Tsoko stood up on his own. Not with Daniel guiding him. Not after being helped to his feet. He just pushed himself up from the ground, wobbled for a moment, found his balance and stayed there. It lasted maybe 40 seconds before he sat back down. But those 40 seconds were enough to make Daniel sit on the ground next to him and put his face in his hands. Not from sadness. From something he had not let himself feel all week because there had been no room for it. Relief. The change after that was not dramatic or fast. It was slow and quiet, the way real recovery always is. Soko started finishing his bottles instead of stopping halfway. He started responding to Daniel's voice, turning his head when he heard him approaching. He started exploring the small enclosure Daniel had built using wooden posts and wire mesh behind the field station, touching everything with his trunk like he was trying to understand the world one object at a time. Daniel started documenting everything. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted a record. He took photos on his phone every morning. He wrote notes in a small notebook about what Soko ate, how long he slept, what seemed to comfort him and what made him anxious. It was the same careful attention he gave to his fieldwork, just pointed in a completely different direction now. A local vet named Dr. Amara Dubé heard about the situation through someone in the village and came to see Soko without being asked. She examined him, checked his weight, looked at his eyes and his skin, and then told Daniel something that stopped him mid-sentence. She said Soko was underweight but stable, and that whatever Daniel had been doing, the basic instinct of it had been correct. She helped adjust the formula mixture, showed Daniel how to check for signs of infection, and came back 3 more times that month without charging anything. That was the first time Daniel felt like he was not completely alone in this. But the situation was still not sustainable. Daniel was spending money he did not have on formula and supplies. His living space had essentially become a care facility for one small elephant. Soko was growing, which sounds like good news, and it was, but a growing elephant needs more food, more space, and more stimulation than one person working a separate job can provide. Daniel started writing emails. Detailed ones with photos and his daily notes attached. He sent them to every wildlife organization he could find contact information for. Most did not reply. A few sent polite rejections. One asked for documents he did not have. He kept writing anyway. Because by this point Soko had started doing something that made it impossible to consider giving up. Every morning without fail, he would press his head against Daniel's chest and just stay there. Like he already knew this was home. 6 weeks in, Daniel got a reply. It was from a wildlife sanctuary called Umvuri, about 4 hours away. They had seen his emails, all of them, and they had been following the situation quietly. They said they had space for Soko and the experience to take his care to the next level. They also said something Daniel had not expected. They wanted him involved. Not just as the person who handed Soko over and walked away, but as part of the process. Daniel drove to Umvuri the next day to see the place before agreeing to anything. What he found was not a tourist attraction or a showpiece facility. It was a working sanctuary, muddy and unglamorous, run by a small team that clearly spent more time with animals than with anything else. There were 3 other young elephants already living there, all orphans, all at different stages of recovery. The moment Daniel saw them moving together, touching each other, communicating in that quiet way elephants do, he understood what Soko had been missing beyond just food and warmth. He had been missing his kind. The transfer was hard. Not logistically, the team at Umvuri handled that smoothly. Hard in the way that doing the right thing sometimes feels like loss. Soko was confused during the journey, pressing close to Daniel the entire ride. When they arrived and the sanctuary team gently guided him into the space with the other elephants, he stopped and looked back. Daniel did not move. He just stood there and let Soko look. Then one of the other young elephants at the sanctuary walked over slowly and touched Soko's side with his trunk. And Soko turned around. Daniel stayed at Umvuri for 3 days, helping Soko adjust, making sure the transition was smooth. By the 2nd day, Soko was already following the other elephants around the enclosure, copying what they did, figuring out where he fit. By the 3rd day he did not look back anymore. Daniel drove home alone on roads that felt longer than they actually were. His notebook was full. His phone had hundreds of photos. And the space behind the field station where the wooden posts and wire mesh were still standing was very quiet. But Soko was alive. And he was exactly where he needed to be. 3 months after the transfer, Daniel received a video from the Umvuri team. It was 30 seconds long. No music, no caption, just footage shot on someone's phone. In it, Soko was running. Not the stumbling, uncertain steps of a sick animal finding his balance, but actual running, ears flapping, trunk swinging, chasing one of the older calves across an open patch of ground. He looked ridiculous and perfect at the same time. Daniel watched it 4 times. What happened after Soko's story got out was something nobody had planned. The sanctuary shared Daniel's photos and some of his notes on their page online, with his permission, and people responded in a way that surprised everyone involved. Not just with kind comments but with real support. Donations came in that helped Umvuri take in 2 more orphaned elephants that same year. A journalist wrote a short piece about Daniel's weeks alone caring for Tsoko that reached people far outside Zimbabwe. A school in another country used the story in a lesson about conservation. None of that was the point for Daniel. But he understood what it meant. He visited Tsoko 4 months later. He was not sure how much an elephant that young would remember after that much time. He walked into the sanctuary quietly, no announcement, no drama. Tsoko was across the enclosure with the other elephants when Daniel came in. He lifted his head. He turned around. And he walked directly over, no hesitation, and pressed his forehead against Daniel's chest exactly the way he used to every single morning behind the field station. Some things do not need explaining. Daniel still works as a field assistant. He still counts animals and writes reports and sets up cameras in the bush. But he also now volunteers at Umvuri twice a month, and the sanctuary has started a small informal training program, partly based on what Daniel figured out alone during those first desperate weeks, for local people who find themselves in situations where an animal needs help and no expert is coming. Tsoko is healthy. He is growing. He will eventually be moved toward a managed wild environment when he is ready. And the man who held him in his arms when nobody else would, the man who showed up with a plastic bottle every 2 hours through the night, will be there to watch him go. That is enough.